Westerners consider Abdul Qadir Khan, the Pakistani nuclear scientist, to be a harbinger of disaster. That is, wherever this man set foot, all sorts of strange things would happen to the West, Israel, and America. Westerners even use insulting terms for this matter. For example, the very term harbinger of disaster that I just mentioned. And regarding Pakistan itself, I'm really sorry to say this, but Westerners used to say that Pakistan is the cesspool of the Middle East, and that cockroaches and terrorists spread from Pakistan to other countries around the world. And it's interesting to know that everything happening today, or even in the future, is linked like a chain to events that happened years, maybe even hundreds of years ago. And even the smallest change that Westerners make in other countries leaves them dealing with its consequences for years. And we see this in every single case. Now, let's not get into the bigger issues. In this video, we want to talk about Operation Orchard, or what the Israelis called out of the box, an operation through which Syria's nuclear facility was destroyed. A facility that was said to have been built in Syria with the help of Iran and North Korea. Hello, I'm Elias Fark here on Persian Trend, and I'm back with another video for you. The Israelis say that Dr. Abdul Qadir Khan was the seed of disaster. Wherever he traveled, you needed to sniff around him. Dr. Safrin, head of the Mossad intelligence division, recounts the story of this operation like this in the mid-2000s. In December 2003, the British and Americans announced that after several months of negotiations, they had succeeded in persuading Gaddafi to abandon his nuclear program, and in return, the West would lift all sanctions. The Israelis had realized that a solid infrastructure for building an atomic bomb had been established in Libya, but it was unclear to Israel just how close Gaddafi had come to acquiring a nuclear bomb. And what was even more interesting was that the United States and Britain had excluded Israel from these negotiations. The Israelis, through their intelligence forces, discovered that Libya's nuclear project was at an advanced stage. The scientist behind this project was a Pakistani physicist who sold his nuclear expertise to anyone who wanted it. At least 2 known countries made use of this scientist and purchased his knowledge. Behind the secrecy of the Libyan project for Iran and Libya, there was a powerful family named Tanner from Switzerland, who, by using forged shipping documents presented to Swiss authorities, supplied construction materials for centrifuge enrichment sites. The 2 main nuclear sites in Libya were hidden in a school and a farm in a village. After the CIA finds out what Gaddafi is up to, they go after this Swiss family, the same Tanner family, and they ask them to cooperate. Otherwise, they would probably end up in prison themselves and lose their wealth. The Swiss family cooperates very well with them, and this information enables the Americans to uncover Gaddafi's entire nuclear program. Gaddafi, realizing during the negotiations that he's at a disadvantage and that his entire project is now exposed, decides to make a virtue out of necessity and agrees to dismantle his nuclear program. He had no other choice, because the Americans knew everything, and if he hadn't dismantled it, not only would they have kept the sanctions in place, but they would have attacked him as well. Which of course is exactly what happened later on. Now, this is actually a topic for another video. What exactly Gaddafi did, what the Americans did, and why the war happened, I'll definitely try to talk about it in detail. Let's not get off track. Let's get back to the rest of the video. Dr. Safrin says that with the US announcement, they realized that the Pakistanis were heavily involved in Libya. After they started investigating, they immediately realized that Dr. Abdul Qadir Khan, the father of Pakistan's first nuclear bomb, is involved in this project. When the Israelis find out what role these people played in selling nuclear documents or nuclear knowledge, they start investigating to see where this scientist has traveled and whom he has met with. Maybe through this they can find new cases and discover new countries that are now pursuing the atomic bomb. Mossad monitors the Pakistani scientist for a long time and identifies 3 countries: Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Syria. 3 countries that were likely new candidates for possessing the atomic bomb. Now it was time for Mossad's analysts to get involved. Egypt and Saudi Arabia were countries that were closer to the West and the United States, and they wouldn't take the risk of building unauthorized nuclear sites and putting themselves in opposition to the West. They definitely wouldn't do that, and based on this analysis, the only country left is Syria. In February 2004, for the first time, Mossad warns about the possibility of a nuclear project in Syria. According to Mr. Soferin, the Mossad document clearly refers to suspicious activities based on the experience in Libya and the involvement of Abdul Qadir Khan from Pakistan. Nevertheless, the intelligence units focused on searching for enrichment sites, supply routes, and traces of centrifuge parts. It made sense after all. Abdul Qadir Khan's expertise was in centrifuges, and in the countries where he had done this work, he had advanced using this method. That is, both Gaddafi's Libya, Pakistan, and the Islamic Republic had all used the centrifuge system. Mossad had also realized that Syria was up to something, but no matter how hard they searched for evidence, they couldn't find anything, which made the whole situation very confusing for them. At times, they even started to doubt themselves, wondering if maybe they were mistaken and Syria didn't have any nuclear activity. However, the Israeli Military Intelligence Agency strongly insisted that Syria was moving toward nuclear energy or an atomic bomb. By the end of 2006, the Israelis had identified several sites with suspicious activities, but they didn't know what was actually happening at those locations. They only knew that there was probably some nuclear activity going on. General Amos Yadlin, the new head of Israel's National Security Agency at the time, said at his conference, "The most important thing for Israel is to discover the Syrian nuclear reactor about which Israel has no information." The Israelis claim that at this stage, something happens that completely changes the situation. In one of the meetings, a young officer says, "Maybe we're actually looking for the wrong thing, and Bashar al-Assad doesn't intend to use centrifuges at all." Maybe the reason we can't find any evidence is that we're searching for the wrong thing. And this very issue becomes the turning point of the case. Of course, this is the claim made by the Israelis. Maybe it's actually true, but maybe it's also related to the story of Sardar Askari. He is someone who fled from Iran, was interrogated by the Israelis, and is said to have given his valuable information to them, and now lives in the United States. I've already made a video about it. I highly recommend you watch it. It's a detailed story that's connected to this case. But now, the Israelis don't want to mention his name in this case or say that they discovered this with his help. Maybe they want to keep all the benefits of this story for themselves and only talk about Mossad's power. Maybe it wasn't just Mossad's power, and the betrayal of corrupt insiders also played a role in this affair. According to the Israelis, they were heading in the wrong direction and were investigating their main hypothesis about the centrifuges, whereas the correct path was actually a plutonium reactor. Enrichment in a plutonium reactor is carried out by inserting metal rods into the reactor core. For this purpose, building a reactor with lead and a concrete shield around it to prevent leakage is essential. Moreover, unlike uranium enrichment centrifuges that can be set up anywhere, a plutogenic reactor is usually built near a water source to allow for continuous cooling. The next step in making a bomb is to use centrifuges that enrich uranium up to 90% and extract nuclear explosive material from it. The extracted uranium is naturally converted into gas. This gas is placed in centrifuges and enriched by spinning them. After the uranium is enriched to 90%, it is turned into a metallic substance, commonly referred to as the core of the bomb. Now, with the new discovery by the Israelis and the new information they have obtained, they realize that they shouldn't be looking for centrifuges. So now that it's not about centrifuges and they have to find a plutogenic reactor, they're putting the Pakistanis aside and looking for someone who can do the job. Who? North Korea. At that time, North Korea had sent its specialists to Syria to work on the Scud-D missiles. But through the research the Israelis conduct, they realize that these comings and goings are much bigger and more significant than just missile construction. The next point, the Israelis had discovered that ships were heading towards Syria, and in their shipping manifests, their cargo was listed as cement. From where? From North Korea, destined for Syria. Now, it's interesting to know that North Korea doesn't have any cement at all and actually imports its own cement from China. Moreover, Syria's cement is supplied by Iran and Jordan, so there's absolutely no need for it to get cement from North Korea. This becomes the second reason indicating that North Korea is involved in this project. And the next very interesting point is that Mossad agents noticed that for some time now, North Korean nationals have been frequently visiting medical centers with stomachaches, cramps, and similar poisonings. This is a sign that they have been exposed to radioactive materials, which in itself can be a very important clue. Now it's time for Mossad to gather more pieces of this case. That's why Mossad agents designed a very special and unique operation. According to investigations by The New Yorker, which Israel has never denied, Mossad operatives go after Ibrahim Othman, the head of Syria's Atomic Energy Commission. Where? Vienna. A meeting that was held at the invitation of the United Nations Atomic Energy Agency headquarters. According to the investigation, Mossad spies enter Ibrahim Othman's hotel room and, by installing software, clone his personal laptop without leaving any trace of themselves. This very operation, where Mossad goes and clones Mr. Othman's laptop, could itself be the subject of another fascinating video. There are also various scenarios being discussed. Some reports mention that a device is installed on the laptop to extract its information. In other reports, it is said that they completely clone his laptop and transfer it to themselves. But the common point in all the reports is that Syria is completely unaware of this breach, and the Israelis obtained very valuable photos and information from Mr. Othman's laptop. Now, it's possible that this information wasn't obtained by Israel on the very day the laptop was cloned. And with that device installed on the laptop, they could later receive any information they needed online whenever they wanted. We really don't know exactly what they did, but it was definitely a very special and secret operation. Now, the Israelis were certain that Syria's activities were plutogenic. That's why they started marking suspicious areas where a reactor might be built. Based on this information, they identified a structure in Syria's Deir ez-Zor province, but they didn't know what was inside the building. An abandoned area near the Euphrates River, along with a pipeline and a pumping station. When you look at all these elements together, you realize that something is happening there. But still, there was no smoking gun. The decryption of Osman's laptop by Israeli military intelligence and the analysis of the information astonished the Israelis. The photos left no room for doubt. A plutogenic reactor, including the core, cooling systems, and water inlet and outlet pipes, was ready for operation. Now it was time for the Israelis to act quickly, because time was of the essence. The Israelis held an important meeting, the Prime Minister, Army Generals, and the head of Mossad. Dr. Sufin, in this meeting, says to the Israeli Prime Minister, "Mr. Prime Minister, do you remember my warning about Syria's nuclear energy site? Now, remove the question mark and put an exclamation mark at the end." That sentence is really funny. Now, I don't know if this was actually said or if it was added just to make the report more interesting. The Israeli Prime Minister lets out a sigh of surprise, falls into thought, and says, "So what should we do now?" From this point on, everything begins. Israel's war cabinet is formed and expert teams are invited to this meeting. Dr. Sufin says that at this stage, the Israelis were afraid that the plutonium shipment had already arrived in Syria and that the reactor would be activated. If this happened, any attack on it would mean an uncontrolled nuclear explosion. The Israeli Prime Minister at the time, Ehud Olmert, asks George Bush for the Americans to attack this site, but George W. Bush rejects this proposal, and in the end, Olmert says that Israel will do what it has to do. The Israelis were afraid that if they carried out this attack, it would start a war with Syria. That's why in their negotiations with the Americans, they requested unique weapons in large quantities. The Americans agreed as well. But the question was whether these weapons should be sent by plane or by ship. In Israel, there was a concern that cargo flights might reveal Israeli targets, because the Syrians were very sensitive about these matters. That's why they decided to bring the weapons into Israel by sea. Now it was time for the main operation to begin. 10 Israeli F-15 fighter jets from the 69th Squadron of the Israeli Air Force, equipped with laser-guided bombs, set out towards Syria, escorted by F-16 fighter jets and several electronic warfare aircraft. According to reports, Israel used electronic warfare to gain control over Syrian air defenses and to present a false image of the sky for the entire duration that the Israeli fighter jets were flying over Syria. This technology neutralizes Syrian radars and may function similarly to the Suter system. Through these operations, Syrian air defense sites are confronted with false targets and even direct manipulation of their sensors. In May 2008, a report citing European sources was published stating that the Syrian air defense network had been disabled by a hidden internal switch that was activated by the Israelis. What's really interesting about the way the Israelis operate is that they put themselves at the least possible risk. And what we always have to worry about is, for example, that they might have a hidden switch in the air defense network, multiple espionage agents, and in most of their wars, they've managed to completely disable the opponent's air defense network. That's exactly what they did with Syria that night, but that wasn't all. A commando group had been present in the area since the day before, and using their laser markers, they were guiding the F-15 fighter jets on exactly where the laser-guided bombs should land. A meticulously planned operation to minimize the margin of error. When the F-15 aircraft approached the reactor site, the Israeli commandos directed their lasers at the Syrian nuclear facility, and the fighter jets released their laser-guided bombs. The Syrian nuclear facility was completely destroyed. All the Israeli aircraft easily returned to their bases, and on their way back, they jettisoned their external fuel tanks over Turkey. Interestingly, right after this attack, the Israeli Prime Minister sends a message to the President of Turkey, explaining to him to relay a message to Bashar al-Assad, saying that we carried out this attack and your nuclear site has been completely destroyed. We won't make any noise about it. You also keep quiet, and let's end the matter right here. If you want to continue, we will keep going as well. Why do the Israelis send this message to Bashar al-Assad? Because they want to make Bashar al-Assad understand that they won't make a fuss about it, they won't inform anyone, and they'll let the situation remain ambiguous. You also don't make a scene and don't tell anyone, so you can save your own reputation and it will be as if nothing ever happened. This way, Bashar al-Assad won't be forced to attack Israel just to save his pride. In my opinion, this incident could be very, very similar to what happened a few days ago. I won't give you any more hints. The smart ones probably already know what I'm talking about. The Syrians' reaction was very interesting. At first, Bashar al-Assad said, "We don't have any nuclear sites at all. And if we did, rest assured we wouldn't leave them unprotected in the deserts of Syria without any air defense." That was an abandoned military site, and I don't know why the Israelis attacked it. However, in 2009, officials from the Atomic Energy Agency found traces of radioactivity in this area, which proved that Bashar al-Assad was pursuing a nuclear bomb. Years later, on March 26, 2018, the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, officially took responsibility for destroying a nuclear reactor built in northeastern Syria in 2007, after a decade of ambiguity. Later, American media reported that this nuclear facility had been built in Syria by North Korea at Iran's request, and that constructing this atomic site had cost somewhere between $1 and $2 billion. Of course, this was a claim made by the Americans, and I can neither confirm nor deny it. I am simply quoting it from American media. If this report is accurate, in a way, it was a smart strategy by the Islamic Republic, because they outsourced their 90% enrichment to another country, so that if it was exposed or any problems arose, it wouldn't pose a risk to themselves. Or even if the Israelis attacked and that nuclear reactor was operational, its explosion wouldn't destroy their own country. If we look at it this way, and if the Americans' report is correct, it would have been quite an interesting move. But in the end, a great deal of wealth from the country that financed these facilities was wasted, and ultimately, no one benefited from it. But what do you think? Do you really believe that the site that was destroyed was a nuclear site? And do you accept the Western reports claiming that Iran financed the construction of these facilities or not? I would really appreciate it if you could share your thoughts in the comments. I'll try to read all of them and respond as much as possible. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And until the next video, take care. you.